Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Congratulations to ISIPM for organizing a wonderful event. I'm here to talk about Brexit. No, not today. Not Brexit. But I would like to start with a little confession. It's a small room, so there's not many people here. I have this condition. I should declare it. I collect failures, project failures. I've been collecting them for a long time. I'm really attracted, really interested in project failures. And I have a collection that keeps growing. I've been fascinated by them for over 30 years. And this is a wonderful, fascinating collection. All types of project failures, some innovation failures as well. Lots of exciting, interesting. All failures are welcome, by the way. I'm not fussy. I take them in any sector, any area. They're all wonderful learning experiences. We talked about learning, so they all provide wonderful learning experiences. A lot of it started for me working on various projects and working on something that was viewed as a success because it was delivered on time and on budget, but nobody ever used the system. So I was standing there trying to make sense of it. It's a success, it's on time, it's on budget, nobody likes it, nobody uses it, but it's a success. And then there was something else, we were using something called prototyping, exciting new technique 30 years ago, a little bit like Agile nowadays. Everyone was excited about prototyping, everyone was saying how wonderful it was. It was very difficult to manage. So it was 6 months late, it was over budget, but people loved it. And that was the failure, because it was delivered late. So I've spent a lot of time trying to make sense of success and failure in the context of projects. And to me, starting, success was this thing that's delivered on time, on budget, and nobody likes. And failure is the thing that is late and everybody loves. So I've been trying to reconcile the two, trying to make sense of them. In the process, I've collected thousands and thousands of failures. I'm now reckoned to have the world's largest collection of failures. So when you think of failures, many people think of me. That's not quite right. But this is the world's largest repository. I'm also collecting government failures. I've been invited to look at a number of government projects. They're very interesting. You see the failure building up. Then you see the total failure. Again, I'm not going to mention Brexit here either, but I'm collecting. I'm looking for new failures all the time. A couple of years ago, UK government asked me to look at a project that hadn't even started. And I thought this was fascinating. They normally call me in when it's failed. You know, there's a body on the ground. You look at it, it's dead, it's not moving. This one hadn't started. But I came in and I realized pretty quickly where the body was going to be. I could see the chalk marks on the ground. I could see where everything was going to be. And in fact, as we progress through this project, it hasn't been declared a failure yet, but it hasn't delivered anything. And it's now a year and a half late. So I'm looking forward to being able to talk about it and saying more about it, but failures are fascinating even before they start. So failures has been really a fascination for me, and I started by looking at project failures, but I've gone beyond that, so I'm looking at every sector. I should, again, small admission, I started in IT, so there are lots of IT failures there, and part of my reason for collecting, part of the rationale for collecting failures from different sectors was to show that IT was no worse than any other sector. So I looked elsewhere, I thought engineering we can't be worse than anyone else. So the purpose of the collection was really to make me feel a little bit better about failures, to make sense of them. And what I'd like to do today is build on it a little bit, but move on to talking about innovation and the role of innovation in what we do. So the session plan is what I'm going to do. It's a murder mystery in 4 acts, hopefully with a little bit of audience participation. Together we will try to solve the mystery with a little help and some evidence. And the mystery, of course, is who killed innovation? Innovation is a wonderful thing. Innovation enables us to do all kinds of interesting things. So in Act 1, Murder at Midnight, we will discover that a terrible crime has been committed. The wonderful, the beautiful innovation, the thing that we used to love and adore, is dead. And what we are trying to do today, what hopefully we will achieve, is discover who killed innovation, and then as a next step, think what we can do about it. There's nothing more exciting, nothing more beautiful than wonderful innovation. Innovation, shiny, beautiful. It brings together all kinds of ideas. It makes things look a lot better. We are all attracted to the idea of innovation. And when it works, sort of the light bulb moment, it can be really exciting. There are many different definitions of innovation. One of the most elegant, one of my popular definitions is by Professor John Besant, who's a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship at the University of Exeter in the UK. And John says innovation means creating value from ideas. So we're continuing with the theme of value, but his bit of the definition is the value from ideas. And what it brings out, it's not just about having an idea, it's not just about the wonderful thing that pops out, the wonderful moment, but it's taking it beyond that. So we start with an idea, we then refine it, we develop it, we test it. It doesn't end there. We continue to work on this innovation, we continue to do things with it. It is a long journey. And innovation is about the journey. Innovation is about taking us through this journey and trying to achieve something with it. It's not just the ideation, it's not the idea that comes at the beginning, it's the value that we can harness out of it, the value that can be delivered through projects, through strategic initiatives, through programs, all kinds of structures. We spend a lot of time reflecting and improving on the innovation, and the focus really is creating the potential value from the idea. So it's idea, yes, wonderful, light bulb moment. How do we translate that? How do we harvest the value from that concept? One of the more interesting people in the management arena is Gary Hamel. In 2007, he published his book, The Future of Management. And really, his interest is in making organizations fit for the future. So moving management forward, making management relevant in a new kind of context, in a new kind of environment. We heard about VUCA, so there are all kinds of new requirements, new changes. And Hamel argues that long-term success comes from management innovation. Management innovations is the key. Organizations need management innovation to change, to move forward. And his argument in the book was that it was time for management to join the 21st century, to drop some of the old ideas, some of the scientific management, some of the top-down management ideas, and really start moving forward. It's not about control, it's not about efficiency, he was arguing, it's about gaining value from the innovation, exploiting, being able to do new things in new ways. And in particular, he's advocating for new ways of mobilizing talent, of allocating resources, and of building strategies. And our challenge in the project management community is to connect that. We talk a lot about resources, we talk a lot about talent, and we also talk about making strategies happen. And the role, what we need to do is to create that link between strategy execution and the delivery that we do within the project profession through strategic initiatives, through projects, programs, and portfolios. So it's an interesting starting point. Gary Hamel is very productive. He has been ranked by the Wall Street Journal as the world's most influential business thinker. Forbes considers him to be the leading expert on strategy. And in his more recent book, What Matters Now, he's saying the challenge is in building organizations that can win in a world of relentless change. He's recognizing the VUCA nature of the world, and it's about rethinking the fundamental assumption of management. And what he's advocating for there is really getting rid of some of the outdated models and moving forward, and he's looking at 5 paramount issues. We're looking at values, trust, ethics. These are obvious. He's looking at innovating, the theme of today, adaptability, which ties in quite nicely, flexibility, agility, being able to do things, respond, not predict and plan everything in advance. He's talking about passion, inspiration, human interest, human spirit. And he's talking about ideology. And his ideology is beyond command and control, beyond bureaucracy. So forging a new kind of future, using the habits of innovation. So I thought he was very useful to mention here, moving beyond the efficiency that we normally focus on in execution and looking at the habits of innovation. So moving on, an IBM survey of 1,500 CEOs in 60 countries, 33 different industries, found that 81% of the CEOs surveyed rated innovation as a crucial capability. They view that as the key to the future performance, the key to corporate success. They need innovation to move forward. Looking deeper within the innovation literature, Isaacson and Tidd in the book, a new book that's been released, focuses on the big new challenges that we face in innovation, and they view them as the increasing volume and pace of change. We recognize the same in project management, growing complexity, we mentioned that, and the intensifying competition and globalization. So plenty of challenges there, and yet with all the interest, with everything that's going on, I talked about the body on the ground, many people ask, what has happened to innovation, particularly in the Western world? Where is it? When we look to industry, the old innovation, the excitement, some of it is dying down a little bit. So if it's dead, what happened to it? Where has it gone? And if we're looking at the body on the ground and bringing in a little storyline, so police have been summoned, there's clearly the body's on the ground. Do we know that the patient, do we know that he's dead? He's not moving, we can kick the body, it's not moving. Good police procedure, right? You kick the body if it's not moving. How do we know? How do we know that innovation is not working? There's clearly a lot of discontent, there's a lot of interest. The IBM survey suggests that we need a lot more emphasis, a lot more focus on innovation. So the question that starts us on the next bit of our journey is, who killed innovation? Who's responsible? And also, why is the chalk man looking so happy? I think he's ready to dance there. So in Act 2, which we're starting now, we try to make sense of the terrible crime, of what's happened to beautiful innovation. We get to meet some of the usual suspects, some of the innovation blockers, some of the people who stop innovation, and start to think about what is it that's stopping us? What is it that's blocking innovation from happening? In particular, if innovation is dead, who's to blame? And what I'd like to do is maybe to get the audience involved a little bit. So we have a police inspector who's new to this type of work. He's not very smart. He needs your help in solving the mystery. So what I'd like you to do for a moment or so is think about your company, think about your projects, think about the kind of situations you're facing. You probably have wonderful ideas. You probably have great things that you could implement. But do you implement them? Do you always, when you have a brilliant new idea, does it become a new innovation for your company? How many people innovate all the time? In the crowd, show of hands. Anybody? How many people innovate sometimes? How many people would like to innovate more? Everybody, yes. Okay, so We would like to do a lot more innovation. So what is it that stops, what is it that arrests your innovation other than the police inspector? Who is it that stops you from innovating? What is it that's stopping you? So we're at a project management event. We're good at stakeholder engagement. So let's take 2 minutes just to say hello to someone next to you. As you do that, just before you do that, think for a moment about what is really stopping you. What is it that's blocking your innovation? What is arresting it? What's stopping it? Think about what it is, and then say hello to someone you haven't met before, and then tell them your number one cause and see if they have something similar. So I'll give you a minute or so. Think about your own thing that's blocking you. Say hello to someone. Tell them what it is. Shake their hand, buongiorno, say hello, tell them what it is, see where they come from and if they have the same blockage. So let's take a minute. You could stand up, say hello, introduce yourself. I'm seeing some conversation, so we'll have another minute or so. Okay, ready? I know we've all got lots of causes. I don't want to spend too long on Act 2 because Act 2 is some of the usual suspects. What I want to do today is really move the conversation forward a little bit as well. But we'll spend a few minutes with the usual suspects. We know the ones normally in project management that block projects, but it will be interesting to think whether the people who block innovation are the same people, whether it's the same causes, whether it's the same areas. So we're rather dispersed, so I'm not going to start asking you to shout yet, but maybe one or two. Does anyone want to shout their number one? Money. Okay, money. Managers, they're terrible. They always block innovation. I think we can solve some of this. I'm not sure we can solve the money one, but maybe some of the solutions we'll talk about will do a little bit to help us address the issue with managers or the structures within the organization. Money, I'm not sure we can do that much about. One other. Go on, one more. I like the bureaucracy, yes, lots of bureaucracy. That's what managers use to block our initiatives, isn't it? Okay, here's a partial list of suspects. And as I go through them, you may recognize some of them. So we have oppressive systems. We have our famous bureaucracy. We have organizational culture that stops us from innovating, stops us from doing things with it. And I see a few of you nodding there. We have bullying leadership sometimes, do it my way or the highway. We have fear of failure. We don't want to be seen to be there. Fear of taking risks. Fear of the unknown. Lack of urgency. So rather than let's get you involved again, I'll go through them one more time. Raise your hand if you recognized the next item as something that impacts your organization or your life or your changes. Oppressive systems. Hands up, anybody? I see a few hands. Oppressive systems to stop failures. Bureaucracy. Oh yes, we all recognize that. Yes, thank you. Organizational culture. Quite a few. Very good. Well, bullying leadership. I hope your boss is not attending as well. Fear of failure. We have a few. Fear of taking risks. Quite a few again. Fear of the unknown. And lack of urgency. So between us, we have a pretty good set. Almost like if this was a bingo game, we'd have a winner, probably. Somebody with a full set of all the factors. So I decided to have another little set of them. We have too much to do, too many initiatives. How many people have that one? Okay, a few. Politics. How many people recognize politics within the organization? A few. Death by business plan. One of my least favorites. We spent so long developing the business plan, we've forgotten what it was about. It becomes all about the numbers. Does anybody recognize that? Death by business plan, anybody? A few. No resources. A little bit like money. Patchy plan. Lack of executive sponsorship. It's a great idea, but the boss won't support you from above. And groupthink. Everybody thinks the same, therefore nobody can see outside it. Groupthink, any votes? A few, yes. So we have a number of factors, and these are the usual suspects, and they stop innovation. But as I said, what I'd like to do today is move the conversation a little bit beyond that. And, okay, another small list. Do you recognize any of these? Because they suggest that the problems are more serious. Do you come up with good ideas but cannot take action because it would be too risky? We've already said that, so if you recognize that, hands up. Too risky, we've had a few of those. Functional managers control resources and therefore can stop innovation, and I'm seeing quite a few hands going up on that one. Problem with innovation, if it's done within pocket, within silos, it's difficult to sustain it, it's difficult to make sure it embraces different areas. Once it goes into a silo, it becomes part of my department, my silo, my area. You don't know how to start a new innovation. Anybody familiar? Some in with that, yes. Innovation fails to materialize. It's a great idea, but somehow it doesn't happen. Anybody? Not many. Potential innovations are not prioritized. We've got lots of new ideas, so we don't know exactly where we're going to go. We recognize quite a few. Portfolio management could be part of it, but of course it goes well beyond that. Politics, stopping new ideas because it's not good now, not strategic. Politics, I'm seeing a few hands going up again. Innovation is driven and prioritized from above rather than letting people, and again, a few hands are going up there. That's not how we do things here. Wonderful idea, but oh yes. That one feels painful. I can see from the way you were raising your hands. That one, we already have a method for doing that. Have you heard that one before? Quite a few, yes. And we tried that 5, 10, 15 years ago. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. This time you're not raising your hands. I can see the pain. Yeah, I've been doing that all the time. So A big part of what we do is about bad habits. And I'll close Act 2 with a quote from an article by Garvin and Roberto in 2005 in Harvard Business Review. What worked in the past is good enough. The absence of a dire threat, employees will keep doing what they've always done. And when an organization has had a succession of leaders, resistance to change is even stronger. A legacy of disappointment and distrust creates an environment in which employees automatically condemn the next turnaround champion to failure. If you live in that kind of situation, identifying the normal suspects is not enough. We need something else. We need something bigger. It is about bad habits, and habits develop within organizations. We can identify little blockages. We can identify people who stand in our way. We can identify a particular cause. But my contention today is there's something more systematic, something more pervasive that affects a lot of our innovation. The reason innovation is dead is not one individual. It's something within the organization. It's the dynamics. And Garvin and Roberto talk about the dynamics, the things that build up. And over time, it becomes more and more difficult to innovate. In fact, the older the organization, the more established, the more difficult it becomes. So that takes us to Act 3, and this is where police are stuck. They have a problem. We need to think in new ways. To innovate, we need to create new things. To solve the problems that we have with innovation, we need to think in new ways as well. If the police can't solve the crime, what do we do? Who do we turn to? If police are unable to solve our crime, what do we do? Who do we need? Go on, suggestions. Investigation. Police is not able to do the investigation. Who can step in? Private investigator. Absolutely brilliant, yes. So we need a detective. We need a good detective who can solve the crime for us. As it happens, oh, I'm not done, wait. So we're going to solve the mystery, or we're going to use the private detective. What would happen if we use different approaches? What would Sherlock Holmes do? We know the usual suspects. The same crimes happen again and again and again. We need something else. We need something different. Sherlock Holmes is particularly good at making connections, looking at other disciplines, looking at other areas, linking ideas, inferences, and deductions. In fact, Sherlock Holmes used to advertise in the stories, he talks about himself as a consulting detective. And I think a consulting detective would be particularly useful for what we're trying to do. So I've looked for evidence, but I've not looked in project management or even innovation. I've looked beyond that in other areas of management to see some of the ideas. And part of the evidence suggests that innovation is changing. Innovation is happening faster. If you can see the yellow line, this is the line of innovation, and we are moving through certain eras. We talked about new technologies. David mentioned a lot of the new challenges, which mean innovation will happen faster, it'll be more demanding. Some companies manage to survive the innovation challenge. So the green bubbles that you see, the little bubbles there, are companies that have done that. So we have a few examples of companies that have done well. The yellow ones are on the line of innovation. The red ones are the ones who are missing out. They may have done well before, but they're not dealing with the new innovations. So they're having some problems, and over time, they lose the ability to innovate. There's an interesting new book that has come out, and the smart detective always looks around to see what else is available. So an interesting new book that's come up published by Yale University Press, and according to Erickson and Weigel, who've done a detailed study of innovation, Western capitalism has lost its propensity for experimentation and adaptation. So looking at the last 30 years, they're saying innovation is becoming less useful, less experimental. Over time, it's decaying. Instead, it has become middle-aged. It happens as you become middle-aged, you become a little risk-averse, lacking in entrepreneurial spirit. In the Western world, they argue we are now on the verge of innovation famine. So part of their argument is we need to bring in fresh people from other countries, from other cultures, who can reinvigorate innovation, who can bring in new perspectives. But there's growing evidence that whilst the idea of innovation is wonderful, there are some issues around it. So here is a list of big innovators in their time, some big companies. You'll probably recognize some of them. They have done well for a long time. But innovation is about survival and continued survival. If it's about value, it's about continuing to deliver that value. And many of those companies did really well. They didn't do anything wrong, but they did not continue to innovate. If you look at each of the case studies, each one of them controlled a technology, a market, a segment, a platform. They had something that was really successful for them. But over time, they let go. Over time, they became a little middle-aged, slightly more risk-averse, slightly more, I'm comfortable with where I am, I know what I'm doing, I'm the market leader. And when you do that, you stop innovating. When you do that, you start identifying some of the symptoms that we looked at. But there's a bigger issue. How do we get there as a company? So it's not just about individuals doing the innovation, it's about something bigger than that. And those companies have discovered that if you really drop your eye off the ball for long enough, you lose the game completely. You miss the market, you miss your opportunity, and other people overtake you, because it is a relative sport. We measure ourselves not just objectively at one point, but also against the competition. And if we miss digital trends, we lose out. Another idea that comes up in strategic thinking is the idea of strategic drift. And a drift is really when the company continues doing what they were doing, but the environment changes. So we can see on the line that we can be pretty much stable, and the environment would move away from us. So if we want to align ourselves with the environment, with change, with technology, with the VUCA world, we need to keep changing faster and faster all the time. So the challenge with strategic drift is to keep up. Otherwise, the gap grows and grows. And it becomes very difficult to stay relevant. So many businesses lose that relevance. They know what they know where they started, they know what they're about, but as the environment shifts away, and there's some interesting work in ecology as well, as the environment shifts away from you, you need to spend time and effort to transform, to innovate, to stay closer to where we are. So strategic fit in terms of innovation is quite important. Which takes us to another interesting concept, the life expectancy of companies. The life expectancy of companies has been shrinking for years. If we go back to the beginning of some of the studies, Professor Richard Foster from Yale University used to map the life expectancy of companies. And initially, when they started, if you go back to 1958, the lifespan of the S&P companies was 61 years, which is a significant life expectancy for a company. It is now reducing to 18 years, and the projection is that we're going to go down even further to around 12. For the these are the successful companies. These are the top 500 companies. What does that mean? What are the implications? The implications is that, again, if we project forward to 2027, by 2027, 3/4 of companies on the top 500 will be brand new, companies we haven't heard about. What it also means is that 3/4 of the companies that are there now will not be there in 2027. They will have missed out on the innovation wave. So a lot of the work on life expectancy of companies would suggest that it's shrinking, and it's shrinking because we are not innovating, we're not ready to deal with it. The Boston Consulting Group also did some interesting studies, and they've looked at the corporate versus the human lifespan. So in red, you have publicly registered companies, and they've looked at patterns of entry, growth, and exit for 35,000 companies. So it's quite a significant survey. And these are publicly listed companies in the US. And when you look at their performance over the years, it's going, in terms of life expectancy, it's going down. They note that, interestingly enough, the lifespans for humans have more or less doubled in that period. So while the life expectancy for companies has halved, the life expectancy for humans has doubled, which is an interesting trend. But possibly my favorite, the detective's favorite idea is looking outside and identifying other trends and other perspectives. And one of the fascinating ones is the idea of corporate life cycles. So if organizations are dying more quickly, it would be interesting to investigate or to look at what happens during the life of an organization. We know about project life cycles, we know about extended life cycles, we talk about benefits, we know about product life cycles. So what happens when we start looking at corporate life cycles? And there are all kinds of models, and this is one of my favorites from Ishaq Adizes. And if you look at it, it's quite interesting, and he's using the perspective of a young man starting out. It is a young man, and it starts with a period of courtship. So the courtship is when you set up your new SME, your new company, you have a brilliant new idea, and those new ideas can be absolutely brilliant. And then we go into the infancy of the company, and we are still very creative because we have this new idea, and the idea gives us a uniqueness. So we're unique, we are different, we innovate, we do things, we change. Sometimes there's a bit of infant mortality, but some companies will survive. Then we go to the go, go, go stage, which means things are becoming a lot more exciting. Sometimes there's some issues, and again, some companies fall along the line, but we continue to do it. Then there is another significant period of growth. As the company excels, they become much better. They start developing. It's beyond the reputation now. It's not just a small company. It's a growing organization. They're into adolescence. So they're doing really, really well. They're now moving into the prime. And in the prime, they probably control the market. Everybody knows who they are. They have done really well. They've become the top companies that we've seen a few slides ago. They are really, really successful. What happens when you're at your prime? You have to keep in shape, don't you? You have to keep in shape. You have to keep watching what everyone else is doing. You have to keep monitoring the environment. If you don't do that, when you get to the top, the only way is down, isn't it, if we don't watch out? So we start getting the aristocracy, and the aristocracy in organization is quite interesting. Aristocracy means that's not how we do things around here. We've been here for a long time. It becomes more and more difficult to innovate within the company, more and more difficult to continue doing what we want to do. Then we get into all kinds of recriminations. You are not following the process. We have a process for this. This is probably where your innovator jumps off. The person who started the company with a brilliant idea doesn't like the process. In fact, they probably hate the process. So we have our innovator saying, I've got new ideas, and you have the company saying, but we have a process for that. So you all want to innovate individually, and the company has a process for that. And in fact, it has more and more and more processes as it becomes business as usual. In fact, innovation is swallowed up by business as usual. And then there's a terrible period, and What happens is we have early onset of bureaucracy. That's a terrible, terrible stage. And when bureaucracy happens, not only do we have a process, but we have mechanisms for enforcing it, and it becomes far more difficult to do the innovation. And unless we do something about it, it's getting a little bit late now, unless we do something about it, eventually they join the slide we had earlier, or they join my list of failures, my space of lots and lots of, it was a wonderful idea, but we couldn't continue, we couldn't sustain it. So great ideas, but there are lots of pressures, and the pressure is between the innovators with the great ideas and the systems that they introduce as a company to exploit the innovation. But once we start exploiting rather than exploring, once the exploitation begins, we have mechanisms, we have structures, we have ways of dealing with it. And that really is where we move to the next step. So we know what's going on. Organizations become more and more reluctant to innovate as they advance in age and maturity. So sometimes maturity is not a good thing. Certainly it's not a good thing if it means more bureaucracy, more systems. It's not a good thing for innovation. So innovators need a balance. In innovation literature, we talk about the ability to adjust, to adapt. And the reason we need to adapt is because innovation means responding to the environment and responding quickly. And that is difficult to do within business as usual. That is difficult to do within bureaucracy. That is difficult to do within a system that tries to block you from doing things that are different. And there is the challenge. So Act 4 is really saying, now that we recognize that there's an issue with our organization, in fact, if I were to answer the question now, who killed bureaucracy? We did. We built organizations around it. We fossilized systems around it. We made it impossible to continue to innovate because organizations are not built to innovate. Organizations are built to exploit. Innovators innovate. Individuals are great at it. Small teams can do it. Once it becomes a big structure, it's a lot more difficult. So in Act 4, we recognize there's a new perspective. We do need a new way of innovating within organizations. So how do we do that? How do we do it within the company? How do we exploit it? How do we get the maximum value from what we need? So we recognize there's a need for a new approach. We work inside organizations. Organizations are built to perform, not to change. Unfortunate, but once you've built an entire organization, you don't want to keep changing it. So we need to be guided by a more dynamic perspective. We need ways of becoming more agile, more adaptive, more responsive, especially in a VUCA kind of world. Change is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's all around us. We need to respond all the time. So it's about flexibility and resilience. How do we build those things within our organization? And in this act, in Act 4, what I'm hoping to do is show you two examples, two ways of building that adaptivity and resilience and capability to innovate within an organization. You're probably familiar with John Kotter and his work on leadership. John Kotter has a perspective on bringing change to organizations, and he has his model. But in his new book, Accelerate, he talks about a different world. The world is now changing at a rate at which the basic systems, structures, and culture built over the past century cannot keep up. Incremental adjustments to how you manage and strategize are not up to the job. The solution is not to trash what we know, but instead to reintroduce an organic way of innovating, of creating new things. And what he's proposing is a dual system. A dual operating system where we continue to be organizations, but we develop a new way of innovating alongside that. And this is really the thesis, the idea that he's got. So on one side, we have the ability to innovate. And a lot of innovation starts through networks, through connections. It's not structured. And it's the networks that are particularly important for that. But as we become an organization, if you like, as we go through the corporate life cycle that we looked at, we move towards an ability to execute, for business as usual to become the dominant thing. We build procedures, we build standards, we build ways of doing things. So we move ourselves from the ability to innovate to the ability to execute better within functions, within silos, within parts of the organization, and in the process, lose the ability to innovate. In the process, we may also lose our innovators. So we want to do it, we want to continue to do it, we want to be effective, but we want to have a different system for doing it. And Kotter's idea, Gary Hamel, we mentioned him before, said to build organizations that are adaptable at their core, we will need to rework every management process. So it enables, rather than frustrates, breakthrough thinking and relentless experimentation. This is innovation. But we need to find new ways of doing it within the organization. So what we're looking at is a dual structure, using Kotter's terminology. So we have our normal functions, our normal structures within the organization, the hierarchies at the front. But behind it, in our dual system, we also have new ways of dealing with innovation. And that requires a lot of guts. It requires recognition. What we are doing is not working. We need this new system. We need the dual operating system. So Kotter's idea, and it's those of you who've read his work, he has the 8 steps for innovation, and they start with urgency. But in his new model, he's saying it doesn't start there. To create this new world, we don't start with urgency, we start with a big opportunity. And the big opportunity is to think, I have a great new idea, we can exploit it, we can do something with it. This is the big opportunity, this should be the focus of the company. And the big opportunity means that we have the dual system kicks in at that point and says, how can we harvest this particular opportunity and do something with it? Then we create the urgency. And then he says, rather than follow his typical method, that was 8 steps, you start with urgency and go through the next 7 steps, we use all of them as accelerators, but focused on the big opportunity. Let's not forget it. Let's not do business plans. Let's not do everything around it. Let's not kill it before it starts. Let's work with the innovation. I won't go through that in a lot of detail, but he's basically arguing that there are all kinds of pressures that exist within the organization. We want to change, we need to change, we have to change, but we get blocked. So we need something else. We need something more exciting, something better, something easier to do. And this operating system is the way of doing it. But what we are doing is we're recognizing that there's a macro opportunity at the macro level, something big, something exciting, and the big opportunity drives the exploration. So in Kotter's new world, it is about a big opportunity. It is about doing things with a big opportunity, making it exciting and relevant, and letting the big opportunity drive what we're doing. We create urgency around the big opportunity, not the business case. In fact, his advice is, let's not do the business case. The business case is going to stop us. When we do the business case, everybody comes around to a meeting and they look at it and say, how did you get that figure over there? So rather than think, I have an idea, I have an innovation, we look at the little figures there. What is on line 77? You said that you will do it for $500,000. How did you get that figure? That's not what the big opportunity is about. The big opportunity is about staying with the curve, continuing with the gap. So this is about macro opportunities. This is about responding in a big way, focusing to the challenge, and don't let people attack you. Don't let people focus on the small figures. It is about setting up a task force within the organization, then not giving it to the silos, but saying this lives outside business as usual. My innovators are over here in this corner, in my dual system. Roger Martin, you may be familiar with his work, has done a lot of work within the business community. He's probably one of the up-and-coming new business gurus. Roger Martin says there are 2 little words that kill a lot of innovations. Any idea what those 2 little words are? 2 words. And the words are, prove it. If somebody says to you, prove it, you're not going to get to the innovation. Roger Martin is saying the fixation with analytic numbers at the beginning kills a lot of the better innovations. Prove it means we're already stopping you. Don't prove it, go ahead. There's nothing wrong with evidence, the right kind of evidence, but let's not kill the innovations at that stage. That requires brave companies. And sometimes this is not possible, so sometimes we need to look at innovation in the small. If you cannot redesign your entire organization, if you cannot have a dual operating system, what do? So we need some kind of small experimentation. Many of our traditional models are linear, they're plan-driven, so we need a new approach. Any suggestions, any ideas for a new approach? Anything? Agile? Fragile, agile, there are all kinds of ideas. Yes, something like agile means we can experiment. So agile is quite interesting, and there are lots of interesting examples. But what I've got for you today is the idea of feedback-driven model for change, based on lean change management from Jason Little. It's a little bit of an agile model. It takes some of the agile ideas and applies them in the context of change, and it's particularly useful for thinking about things in the small. So on the one hand, we have Kotter and his let's rethink the organization and the big opportunity. Sometimes we can't do that. So what can we do if we lower down the organization? This is the other side of the approach. So we have a cycle. We start with insights, then we investigate options, and then we create experiments. And this is an agile way of innovating, an agile way of creating change in the small, little bit at a time. So we are proving it, we are dealing with the need to provide evidence, and we are doing it a step at a time. The change cycle, therefore, we start with the insights. We try to understand the current challenges facing the organization. We then look at the options. There are lots of options. Each option will come up with a cost, a value. It's some kind of idea, and we see what we can do with that. And we design experiments. And each experiment has its own mini cycle. So as we've seen there, once you decide to experiment, you prepare for the experiment, you introduce it. And it's designed almost scientifically. So we call them hypotheses. And we come up with this hypothesis, and we test it to see whether it's working or not. We review the results and then design the next little experiment. So we continue to do things all the time. We continue to do exciting little things. We are not changing the entire organization, but we are experimenting. We stay alive. We don't let the organization die. We revise things. We test. We check where we are. And we continue to operate that way. I'll skip through most of that. We talked about the cycles. The cycles are quite significant because they allow us to do major experiments, they allow us to explore new things, they allow us to find out what's happening. The other beautiful thing about the approach is we don't have change targets anymore. In change management, people used to talk about change targets. They're actually partners to the change. They participate in the experiment. They're part of our team. In the agile spirit, they're part of deciding what we're going to do. So they allow us to do things together, to explore, and they ask questions. Because we have hypotheses, what would happen if? What could we do? So we get all kinds of interesting ways of changing what we are doing. So we've seen two examples. One is macro change, changing the operating system, creating a dual system within the organization. The other is micro, doing little experiments, discovering what we can do. I recognize there are lots of other ways of rejuvenating and introducing change. We talk about them quite a lot in innovation. We can respond to more opportunities, work cross-functionally, not get stuck in silos. Create external collaborations, I think it was mentioned today, crowdsourcing, an opportunity with new platforms and technologies, democratize innovation, let the user innovation drive us, more or less as we've seen in the agile model there. We have new change business models that we can apply. We can work in agile fashion as we've seen. We can experiment, again, something that we've seen. It is normally recognized that everything that's been done within management at some point had been said by Peter Drucker. So Peter Drucker also said quite a lot about innovation. He argued for innovation as practice, a place where we do things all the time, where we change, where we try to make things exciting, but warned that innovation is hard work. It is a lot of work. It is not just the idea, it's analyzing it, developing it, moving ahead with it. It's a lot of hard work. And he's given 3 don'ts if you want to engage in innovation. Don't try to be clever. Innovations will have to be handled by morons, remember that. 2, don't diversify, don't splinter. Don't do too many things at the same time. So experiment one thing at a time. Have one big innovation. And don't try to innovate for the future. Focus on where we are now, on the present, and work from there. Work on the gap that's forming in terms of the strategy. So, summary. We talked about 4 periods, a mystery in 4 acts. In Act 1, we're doing what we always do. It's about habits, and what we get is the dead body on the ground. Act 2, which is about awakening, we start asking why. So finding the causes, but we find the same kind of causes. In Act 3, we said we need a great detective. I'll do that one more time. We need the great detective to help us solve the mystery. And the great detective is quite important in changing the perspective. Changing hats allows you to think in new ways. So from now on, I'll start wearing my detective hat on a regular basis to change perspective. It allows us to dig deeper. In Act 4, we talked a little bit about maturity, about thinking bigger, thinking smaller. Both bigger and smaller could work. They're both different. We're experimenting. We're doing things differently. And what we got, therefore, is IARM, a model of maturity in stages of innovation, innocence, awakening, realization, maturity. I didn't intend to do that, but when I finished, I realized we can have a maturity model. Of course, I don't want to market it as a maturity model, but this is where the talk has taken us. We need to look at things differently. We need to look at them in the big. We need to look at them in the small. And I think I'll give the final word to Dilbert. And the manager says, what we need is an overarching strategy to stimulate our innovation. Dilbert says, or you could stop smothering the innovation we already have. The boss says, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. And there it is. And there it is for many companies. Thank you very much. Grazie mille. Good luck and enjoy your innovations. Thank you.